Let us now take a look how to connect a data source. We will be connecting the MySQL data source. So I'm using the Add Data Source wizard. In order to do this, I'm selecting MySQL here as a data source. Now I need to provide an alias for my data source. This will be the name I will be addressing it in my future SQL statements. We need to specify the host. And of course, we want to specify the schema we want to connect to, and username and password for this data source. I will add one additional translator parameter here because we want to inspect the native queries feature later. So let's just add this as a feature as well here and test the connection. So we can see it's successfully connected. And when I finish with the wizard, then Data Virtuality will take a look at all the tables inside this data source, and I can open it up. I can see here there's 76 tables inside, and I can take a look at each of the definition of the tables. So I can see here the composition, I can see the indexes on the data source on this specific table. Let us now issue the first select statement. I can do this by simply clicking View Content. And this will return the data from the MySQL database, from the specific table, mysql.address, and show me the result as a table. Now this was using a live connection, and that means I have no extract in between there. So I'm getting the data live as it is now. Let us now use the update function. So we will write an update statement. Just copying this over here. And you can see here, I just update the address table, setting address line to second line for the first line. So I will be updating this one. So it has been running. And now if I select from this table again, you can see here that the address line 2 has changed. So that's also a feature of our connectors. You can write to the data sources if it's of course permitted for the user that is connected to the data source. Let's now take another look at the MySQL native function. So I want to have a native request on the data source. And we can see here that there's a native procedure because I activated the option. So let's use it. So I will call this native function with a request of describe address. So I will be getting the actual metadata from the MySQL data source. So let's just run it. And we can see here that there's also a different definition of data here. So for example, address line 1, you can see here it's varchar. On MySQL, it's a string. So we adjust the data model, we adjust the metadata to fit for all the different data sources. They are all using simple data types that are the same, which makes it much easier to operate with the data. Let us now take another look at the features of this connector. So let's take a look at address here and what kind of options that we have. So one option we could do here is set the permissions. So we can set the permissions explicitly on this one table. And let's add some roles here. So let's say the data analyst is allowed to read and update. So I can just adjust this here, and the BI user will only be allowed to read from this table. So I quickly set the permissions, and these are effective on the Data Virtuality server. Another thing we can do is materialize the data. So if we want to integrate this into our analytical database, which can be, for example, Postgres or Redshift, I can just use right mouse click and then materialize now and on schedule. Now this will simply copy the data over. If I choose my interval here to be daily, it will copy the contents of the MySQL.address table into my analytical storage. Every day at 12 p.m. it will be refreshed. Let us now talk about changing metadata. So let's assume that someone was changing the metadata, so the structure of a table on MySQL or we're adding some new tables on the MySQL data source, in order to get these changes into the metadata of the data virtuality server, I can simply right-click on the data source and refresh metadata. Now this is all I need to do to get the newest metadata. It will be effective immediately.